Welcome back to educator.com. For the next lesson, we're going to go over prisms and cylinders. Okay, so a prism is the first type of polyhedron or solid that we're going to go over. Now, polyhedron, it sounds like a big word, but poly means many. Now, we're used to hearing the word polygon, right? So polygon, remember, is it's like a shape where we have many sides, right? Polygon. Polyhedron, it's kind of a way of saying many faces. Now, we're going to go over faces in a bit, but polyhedron is just when you have like a three-dimensional figure, three-dimensional object. And each side has to be straight. It has to be a segment. Okay? And that is called a polyhedron. Another name for these three-dimensional objects are called solids. Now, solids we can have round or circular sides, okay? But polyhedrons, that's the only difference between them. They're pretty much the same thing. Solids and polyhedron, they're both talking about three-dimensional objects. Solids, it could be like, they could be circles. The sides could be circles. For polyhedrons, each side has to be straight. They have to be segments, line segments. Okay? So many faces. So prism is the first type. Prism is when you have a three-dimensional object with two opposite faces that are parallel and congruent. So let's talk about faces. Each one of these sides, like this right here, then this right here, okay? Those are all faces. All the sides of the prism, the three-dimensional solid, is a face. When two of those faces are parallel and congruent, okay, the two opposite faces are parallel and congruent, then you have what's called a prism. Now, those two faces that are opposite and parallel and congruent, those two are called bases. Now, this base we can label as the top face, and the bottom face. Now, you can't really see a bottom face. Okay, those can be labeled as bases because see how these two sides are congruent and they're parallel, okay? So those could be labeled as bases. For this type of prism, so anytime you have just two opposite side faces being parallel and congruent, you have a prism. This is called a rectangular prism because the bases are rectangles. Now, you're probably thinking that these two sides, the left and the right side, are also parallel and congruent. The front and the back sides, this front and the back, are also parallel and congruent. So rectangular prisms, you can actually label any two opposite faces as your bases. Let me give you an example of one that is not rectangular prism. Say I have 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then I have when I have something like this, okay, this is also a prism. Now, the bases would be this top face and this bottom face because they're both parallel and congruent. Okay, so this is called a prism. More specifically, what is the base in the shape of? What's the polygon? This is a pentagon, right? So this is actually called a pentagonal prism, okay, because it's the base is in the shape of a pentagon, 5 sides. Another example would be triangle. Now let's say okay, like that. Now, the bases are not going to be top and bottom. In this case, it doesn't have to be top and bottom. Okay, there's nowhere where it says the bases of the prism has to be top and bottom. As long as the two faces that are opposite are both parallel and congruent. Okay, meaning they're facing the same direction. They're not going to ever intersect, and they're congruent. They have to be exactly the same. So this is also a prism, okay, because we do have two sides that are parallel and congruent. And this, the base is in the shape of a triangle, right? So this is called a triangular prism. Okay, so these are prisms. We're pretty much only going to go over the rectangular prism, okay? But just so you understand what a prism is, these are just a few examples. So again, this is called base. Prisms always have two bases. Okay, so we have to have two bases. The rest of the sides, the rest of the faces, okay, the ones that are not bases, are called lateral faces. Okay, so then this right here, this right here, this side right here, this back side right here, those are all lateral faces. Okay, so then this is a lateral face, lateral face, lateral face. Okay, this triangle is a lateral face. Those are all lateral faces. Okay, so all the sides of a prism are either considered bases or lateral faces. Okay? Now, regular prism, regular we know is when all the sides are the same, right? It's regular. All the sides are the same, all the faces are the same. And that's what it means for a prism. If I have a regular prism, that means all the faces are exactly the same. They're all congruent. If I have a rectangular prism where all the sides are the same, then we know that each side has to be a square, right? Okay. Each side of this is congruent. This, the name for this, there's a specific name. It's a cube. Okay, I'm sure you've heard of that before, a cube. So a cube is a rectangular prism that's regular. Okay, regular prism. Now, okay, so we want our base, we want our faces, right? Each side is a face. This right here, each segment, okay, each of these segments are called, okay, let me just draw this base to this base so you know that that's what I'm talking about. Each of these sides, these segments, they're called edges. Okay, so edge there, this is an edge, this is an edge. Okay, all of those are called edges. Okay, so sides are faces, these are edges, and then this right here, it's like the vertex, right? But the plural word for vertex is vertices. So all of these make up the vertices of a prism. Okay, so we have base, or another face, right? Face, and this is more specifically, because each one of these are faces, so more specifically, this is a base. But these are all considered faces, edges, and vertices. Okay. Now the next type of solid is a cylinder. You've seen the shape before, maybe a can of soup. Okay, that's a cylinder. A lot of things. A cup, okay, could be a cylinder. Now a cylinder, is when we have two bases that are congruent and parallel circles. So it's almost the same thing as a prism where we have two opposite faces being parallel and congruent. Okay, with the bases, they're called bases, right? But in this case, the two bases have to be circles. Okay, if they're circles, then it's a cylinder. So then we know that this is a base, and this has to be the base, right? So then those are circles, and then the altitude is like the height. A height is how tall this is. How tall is it standing? So this is h. Now, if you lay it down sideways, so it's like this, okay, make sure that this has to be the height, right? It's from base to base. That is considered the height. So again, cylinder is a solid where we have two circles as the bases, and this is the height. The altitude is the height. Okay. So our first example is classifying each prism by the shape of its bases. Okay, so then this first one, it's almost the same as the one that we went over. Now the base for this, it has a few different pairs that we can label as bases. Okay, but you can't label all of them as bases. Only two faces can be bases. Two faces can be bases. So if you want, you can label the top and the bottom as bases. Or if you want, you can label the front and the back. Or, okay, the left and the right sides. As long as there's only two sides. But make sure it's not top and like left, okay? They have to be opposite sides and it has to be congruent. So I want to label my top and my bottom as my bases. Figure out the shape of the base. It's in the rectangle, right? So it's in the shape of a rectangle. So this would be a rectangular prism. Rectangular prism. The next one here, if you look at like this side right here, the left side and right side, see how they're intersecting right here? So they can't be called the bases, even though they might they're the same, they're congruent, they're not parallel because they're intersecting, right? So, and then the bottom side, this rectangle right here, is not parallel and congruent with any other side, right? So it has to be this triangle here, this front, and this back. Those would be the two bases. Okay, again, parallel and congruent. That is in the shape of a triangle, the base, right? In the shape of a triangle. So this is called triangular prism. Okay, and then the third one, here, even though this one's a little bit tricky because we do have opposite sides being parallel and congruent, but they can't be, the lateral faces, and I forgot to mention this to you guys, but lateral faces, meaning the sides that are not bases, they have to be rectangular. Now this top and this bottom are the only sides that are not rectangular, right? They're not rectangles. So then they have to be the bases. So always look at, if you're having a difficult time identifying what sides are the bases, just look for the sides that are not rectangles, okay? Look for the sides that are not rectangles. So you should look at this side, the top side and the bottom side, because they're not rectangles. Let's say those two are not parallel and congruent, right? Then it wouldn't be considered a prism. It's not a prism. Okay, so then this with this bottom side are the faces. And then this shape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember, polygon with 6 sides is a hexagon, right? So then this is a hexagonal, okay, see I just put an AL, hexagonal prism. That's the name for this right here. They're all prisms. This is a rectangular prism, triangular prism, hexagonal prism, because based on the shape of its base or bases. Next example, name 2 different edges, bases, and vertices of the prism. Okay, remember what edges are, bases are, and vertices are? Edges are like the edges of this prism, the segments, right? So 2 different edges. Be AC and DE or ED. Doesn't matter because either way you go from here to here or here to here, it's the same thing, right? I can say BE, so I mean there's any one of these edges you can name. Then faces, needs different color. So faces, now faces, any one of these faces, right? So I can say CD, BE. Now this is a rectangle, so I can say rectangle CDEB. Okay, or I can say triangle ACB. Now, if you recognize that this is also the base, right? But remember, all these sides are just called faces. Face is another word for saying sides. So face. And then the last one, in vertices. So vertices are, think of vertex, okay? Those points right there. So I can say point B, point E. Okay, so those are vertices. The third example, name the solid for each object. So we're going to see what shape, okay, what the name of the solid is for each of these. The first one, a can of soup. And we know a can of soup looks like this, right? So this will be a cylinder. A shoebox, we know a shoebox is in the shape of a prism. More specifically, it'd be a rectangular prism, right? Camping tent. Now this one, I'm just going to draw it off for you guys so you guys can see a little bit better. Now, yeah, there's different versions of camping tents, but this main one, kind of like this, if you can see that. Horrible at drawing. Okay, like that. Okay. So this would be, look at the bases, right? The bases are triangles. This is a triangular prism. A roll of paper towels. So paper towels, it looks like this, right? It has that a little bit longer, and it has the hole in the middle, right? Like that. So this one would be cylinder. And the fourth example, we're going to write true or false for each statement. The first one, a cylinder has congruent bases. Cylinder, we know it must have congruent bases, or else it's not going to be called a cylinder, right? So the bases are congruent circles. So this is true. A triangular prism has 3 faces. Triangular prism. So like this. Does it have 3 faces? Now, just the front and the back, this right here, just the bases alone, there's 2, right? But then you have to think that there's this side, right? That's 3. Then the other side, which is this other side, that's 4. Then the bottom side, that's 5. Right? Each one of those is faces, right? So does it have 3 faces? No. So this one is false. A cube is a rectangular prism. Where a cube is, it's a regular prism, right? Where all the sides are the same. There's a cube. Is it a rectangular prism? Are the bases in the shape of rectangles? Well, it's actually in the shape of squares, but isn't a square a type of rectangle? So, this one is true. Okay, a cube is a rectangular prism. Okay, and that's it for this lesson. Thank you for watching Educated